The SNP leader, Humza Yousaf, prepares for his big conference speech. But can the party see a path to Scottish independence? This is Politics Live. With me in the studio for this Politics Live special, the SNP's David Linden. And I'll be joined from Aberdeen by our political correspondent, Nick Eartley. Today, the SNP agree a new strategy for independence as Hamza Yousaf prepares to deliver his first speech as party leader.
The fact is, we have hit a Westminster roadblock. So if they are going to deny us a referendum, then let us use the next general election to put independence front and centre.
Fantastic campaign.
But after a Labour victory in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, is the SNP losing support? A show of support from Nicola Sturgeon, but can Hamza Yousaf deliver where she couldn't?
You know that I think Humza's doing a fantastic job as leader of the party and as First Minister, and I don't think there's any doubt from what I've seen about who is in charge at this conference, and it's Hamza Yousaf.
Welcome to this Politics Live special. We'll bring you the SNP leader and First Minister Hamza Yousaf's speech to party conference in about 15 minutes' time. Of course, there's always the caveat that it might be running slightly late, as is usually the case with conference speeches. It is his first conference speech as leader and perhaps the last before next year's expected general election. He's expected to use this moment to argue that the SNP must focus on why Scottish independence would benefit the economy and public services. But, David, let me bring you in at this point, since we have a few minutes to chat before Hamza Yousaf takes to his feet, about the fact that this has been difficult for him personally. The background to this, the war, the Israeli expected incursion into Gaza because his in-laws are trapped in the south of the Gaza Strip. And he himself has said that Israel's what he called collective punishment has gone too far. How's he actually been?
Do you know, I've been going to conference for a number of years, Joe, and just getting to London this morning from conference, and there's a kind of remarkable atmosphere and just people holding Humza in awe for the fact that, as well as going through this incredibly traumatic process, he's still getting on with his job. And, you know, like in the run-up to conferences, parties spend a fortune on focus grouping, opinion polling, all of that goes out the window. And I think what you're seeing from Humza this week is somebody who is just leading by instinct. And I think a lot of people are actually seeing the real Humza that I've known for probably the best part of 20 years now. I grew up in the youth wing with him. But there's no doubt it's been a really challenging time for him and his wife, Nadia, who my thoughts and prayers are with at this time.
I mean, the issue of independence is always front and centre, to quote Hamza Yousaf himself. And there's been a change in the policy. The party has dumped, if you like, Nicola Sturgeon's policy, which was to turn the general election into a de facto referendum. Why is that?
Well, I think what you've actually seen is the party's put a bit more meat on the bones. So we have said that independence for Scotland will be on the ballot paper. It's no surprise that the SNP happens to believe that Scotland is a nation and nations are best served when they govern themselves. But what we've done is we've put more meat on the bones and added some stuff in there about the fact that we want to see the power to hold a referendum transferred to the Scottish Parliament.
And you failed to
but
do that
also,
up until now.
Well, we haven't failed. It's actually the UK government has failed to respect democracy. I mean, the real issue here is it's the democracy deniers and the building behind us who are not giving effect to what people in Scotland have voted for at council elections. So yes, we want to see a perhaps incoming Labour government grant us that power to hold a referendum, but we also want to see powers that would give effect to dealing with the cost of living crisis. So, for example, our biggest focus at the moment is on the cost of living crisis. It's about how do you support families and households through that challenging time. And so I don't think Sir Keir Starmer, if he becomes Prime Minister, is going to turn around and seriously say, we won't be giving you the powers to give, for example, a £400 energy rebate, mortgage relief, making sure that we've got price controls on food, as they do in France. So I guess the question goes back into the core of the Westminster parties to say, are you going to continue denying democracy to Scotland? Are you going to deny more devolution?
I think the answer is yes.
We've put that to the test.
Well, I think the answer is yes. And
just this afternoon, we actually put that to the test in the House of Commons because we had a bill to devolve employment law to the Scottish Parliament, and the Labour Party sat in its hands. So we are in the ridiculous situation where the Trade Union Congress, Scottish Trade Union Congress, want to see devolution of employment law. And that new Labour MP, Michael Shanks, that you referred to in the opening credits, was posted missing today when it comes to some of the biggest issues about workers' rights.
Well, let's focus on what you're going to do. But before we do, let's catch up with Nick Eardley in Aberdeen. Just listening there to the opening remarks, it's always interesting when SNP politicians say they would like to focus on things like the cost of living, and yet the question of independence, or process, you might argue, is actually still what they want to talk about.
Well, yes and no. So what happened on Sunday was the SNP endorsed a policy that was a bit of a smorgasbord of different people's ideas. But I haven't met anyone here who thinks it's actually going to deliver the big breakthrough that means there's going to be a referendum in the next 2 or 3 years. When you chat to SNP people privately, I think they accept there's a big roadblock at the moment, which is the UK government saying no, that's unlikely to shift, and a lot of this is about political pressure and political posturing. You'll notice David there talking a lot about Labour, the Labour Party, and having a go at Labour. Well, that's because Labour are presenting a bit of a challenge to the SNP, and I wouldn't be surprised if Humza Yousaf does the same thing in his speech as well. But what I think will be really interesting over the 45 minutes or so he speaks for is how much he talks about independence and whether it goes beyond, you know, what you always get at an SNP conference, which is a kind of rallying the troops on the independence issue. I'm not sure he will. Chatting to people, his allies and people who work closely with him, I think he wants to use this speech to say, let's not talk loads about independence. Yes, we support independence. Yes, we think ultimately it's the solution. But if the Rutherglen by-election taught the SNP anything, I think it's that people are talking about other issues on the doorstep. They are talking about, as David just said, the cost of living, they're talking about the economy, they're talking about the NHS. So I wouldn't be surprised if they are the main focuses of Humza Yousaf's speech. And I've been told it's pretty policy heavy. It's him trying to set out his vision for what he wants to do as leader. He's had an absolutely torrid time of it. He's had some pretty bad luck. He's had to deal with some very difficult circumstances, the by-election, the defection of Lisa Cameron to the Conservatives last week, the pummelling in Rutherglen, the poll situation, which suggests Labour might be catching up with the SNP in Scotland. He's had to deal with all that. He wants to use today to move on a bit and say, this is me. This is what I want to do with the top job.
Well, as you say, it has been a particularly torrid time. People are explaining or trying to say that the SNP have imploded, if you like, over the past few months, or certainly since the start of the year. And we'll talk about Nicola Sturgeon in a moment, because she was at the conference, has been at the conference, and to some extent stole the show, according to some people there. But what about the mood at conference? If it's going to be policy heavy, this speech, in order for Hamza Yousaf to try and carve out some political space for himself, what about delegates there? He's got to try and unite his party first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually that was a lot of what Sunday and the independent stuff was about. It wasn't actually about getting another referendum in the next 2 or 3 years. It was about trying to get a united position the party could take. I'll be honest, it's a pretty confusing position. I think I understand it, but I've heard different people explain it in different ways. And Keith Brown was on Politics Live earlier, and he talked about it being most seats, and then he said a majority of seats. And it is a majority of seats, but some people are still talking about most seats. So I don't think it's like a slam dunk of a position that the SNP are suggesting. But look, David's right. There's always a bit of a sense of the people that turn up at these conferences are the faithful. They're in fairly good spirits because they're together. But this is the most low-key SNP conference I've ever been to. I've been going to them since 2016, I think, a couple of years after the independence referendum. They used to be in massive halls with thousands of people. This is in a small... Today's speech, the one we're about to watch, is in a much smaller hall than Nicola Sturgeon's last week. I think there's a bit of a sense of frustration within the party that they do feel at the moment like they're under a lot of pressure. They're not on the march. They've not got much momentum. If anything, they're sort of in retreat, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Nick Eardley, we'll come back to you shortly. I mean, the party, it feels diminished. I'm saying this as somebody watching the party. It's very quiet there behind Nick Eardley. He says...
That's because they're all in the hall
Well, I know,
I
know, but there isn't a feel and atmosphere. We're going to hear from some of the delegates that we spoke to earlier in just a moment. And, I mean, it's no wonder, because you have been through a really, really difficult few months. I mean, Nick Eardley mentioned the Rutherglen by-election. It was a pretty stunning victory for Labour. There were some special circumstances to do with that. And there is this sort of shadow still hanging over the party, this police investigation, senior members of the party, including Nicola Sturgeon, being arrested and released without charge. And Humza Yousaf has had to come in and deal with all of that. Does it feel diminished?
Well, I think, look, first, I mean, Hamza Yousaf, like, in the run-up to the Rutherglen by-election, I worked very closely with him, acknowledged that this is a challenging backdrop for the SNP.
Well, I think that's an understatement, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly a challenging backdrop. I mean, I don't think we want to catastrophise too much. I mean, look, the reality is the Scottish Government is still getting on with the day job. You know, just this morning announcing that extra £100 million a year going into the National Health Service.
Sure.
One of the first things Humza did when he came in as First Minister, in recognition of that cost of living crisis. Now, bear in mind the limited levers that we have as a government when it comes to the cost of living crisis.
But you do have levers.
He's tripled the fuel insecurity fund. So we are getting on with the day job and responding to people's priorities. I think that's a lot of what you're going to see in this speech.
But is that why you've changed the policy when it comes to another independence referendum? Do you understand the policy, by the way?
I do
because we had the
policy,
deputy leader who did say most seats. He corrected it to majority of seats. So just to be clear for our audience and our viewers, you are saying that the SNP, if you win a majority of seats in Scotland at the next general election, that would be a mandate to ask for negotiations. Correct,
and it's not an unusual phenomenon. Take, for example, the 2019 general election. The Conservative Party went into that election with a crisp, clear message to say, get Brexit done. They got a majority and they were therefore able to put their manifesto into effect. What the SNP is proposing with this policy is not some sort of bold new thing, it's about democracy, which
it's
people
not
in Westminster
bold.
deny.
One could argue, David, it's quite the opposite. I mean, you won 48 out of 59 seats in 2019. Now you're saying if you win 29 seats, which would be a majority, that would be a mandate. I mean, the question I put to Keith Brown, which I will put to you too, is if Westminster governments, wrongly in your mind, I understand that,
and
whether it's Conservative or Labour, wouldn't listen to you when you had 48 out of 59 seats, what's going to make them listen to you when you've only got 29, which could happen?
Well, look, I mean, that's essentially Westminster's issue because they're the ones that are denying democracy.
But
my question for you, Joe, would be...
No, I'm not being interviewed here, David, you are.
It's a conversation.
Excuse me.
So, can you think of any other country in the world where a party gets a majority of seats in that election in the nation in which they stand and they don't get to effect the manifesto?
I'm not saying that you have a valid point, but how will that lower bar persuade them more than the current position you're in, which you've failed to convince them it's worth negotiating on? Because
the whole premise of this policy going into next year's general election is to make clear what the path is. The people at home that I represent in Glasgow East aren't interested in process. They want to know, well, if independence is going to happen, what is going to happen? All right, well, we're going to pick that up after the speech, but first let's hear from some of the delegates at the conference.
I'm really hoping that there's some talk about just unity across the party, and as we drive forward towards independence, I think it's important that the leader gives a clear and concise idea of what we're working towards.
We need to present a united independence movement, and I think Humza's going to deliver that. But I also think he's going to do what's necessary for the country on things like climate change. That is crucial to our future.
I'm definitely happy with the seats over the amount of votes, so I think that is the way forward. I was happy with Nicola Sturgeon's plan last year, but obviously that didn't go as well as we hoped.
I think the way forward, that's the important thing. It's the thing that we all need to know. We need to know what direction, well, we know the direction we're going in, but how the hell we're going to get there.
Well, there's the big question. How do you get there? Let's just take a look inside the hall, because I can see SNP MP Alison Thewlis there, perhaps as the warm-up before Hamza Yousaf takes to the stage. We're expecting it to happen in the next few minutes and for him to talk for about 45 minutes to the gathered delegates there in Aberdeen. So we'll keep an eye on that there in the hall. Unity, that was the sort of push from all those delegates, because it hasn't been unified, has it, recently?
Well, look, I think there have been challenges in the SNP, but one of the things that I was quite struck by sitting in the hall on Sunday, and, you know, I'm an SNP MP, I take part in these internal meetings, and watching some of my colleagues who quite vociferously debate with each other internally, getting up, making their case, and then getting behind this message, because what people at home care about, Joe, is not process anymore. They want to know, well, if you're selling us a vision
You've realised
of
that then,
independence,
have you, after all this time?
Well, perhaps that's a challenge the SNP has had to concede on. But listen, the thing that really matters to people at home is that cost of living crisis, and with the powers of independence, we can move ahead with, for example, that £400 energy rebate, that mortgage relief.
We'll test that. We probably haven't got time to do it before the speech, but we'll test it after the speech, particularly post-Brexit, and some of the assumptions
Brexit
made
Scotland
by...
didn't vote for, of course.
Some of the assumptions that certainly have been made by the SNP. One of the questions, though, if you don't win the next election, will that be the end of your quest for an independence referendum?
Well, the election's not taken place yet. I'm fairly confident
well, no, I know
that the policies
but
that Humza's going to outline...
You've been very firm about what you now see as the mandate, the bar, for reaching a mandate for negotiations. If you don't reach it, I presume the logic of that is that will be the end of your quest for an independence referendum.
I'm fairly confident that we'll get a majority of seats at the next general election.
And if you don't?
Well, we'll see what that happens in that case, but I think you're asking me a hypothetical question.
Well, of course I'm asking you a hypothetical, but you've posed and
every
changed...
party sets a test in the run-up to an election.
Right, well, that's the test then.
And so that is the test that we will put to the electorate, but we have a clear, crisp message, a path ahead that both brings together our central message of independence and how that can deal with some of the economic issues that people sitting at home watching this are dealing with, but also putting meat on the bones in our challenge to the other parties who fundamentally have caused this problem because they deny democracy.
Let me just see if we can show you the Scottish Daily Mail on the front page. I mentioned Nicola Sturgeon stealing the limelight. It says Humza overshadowed as ex-First Minister wows SNP conference, but at least she backs him for ripping up her independence plan. I mean, it is difficult, isn't it? It's hard to have your sort of predecessor there. Liz Truss actually was at the Conservative Party conference with Rishi Sunak. Not easy. Even she looked awkward, Nicola Sturgeon, sitting there as she got a standing ovation.
Well, look, I mean, I think that's probably the most positive front page Nicola's ever had from the Scottish Daily Mail, which is not historically very friendly towards the SNP. But look, Nicola Sturgeon was the SNP candidate in my constituency when he was 2 years old. She is a towering figure in the SNP, somebody who carried our nation through the pandemic. And there is undoubtedly a lot of respect for Nicola, both within the SNP and indeed throughout Scotland. And the fact that Nicola Sturgeon, who, let's not forget, is an SNP member, attending her own party conference, is hardly front-page news.
Well, it's a bit different when you're the sort of previous leader. I just want to bring in Nick Eardley while we wait, actually, for Hamza Yousaf to take to the stage. How did that go down, Nicola Sturgeon? She did look a bit awkward as everyone stood up around her clapping.
Yeah, look, I was surprised she turned up as the honest answer. We only found out at the last minute. I think it was quite a last-minute decision for her to come up. What I thought was strange was she did a press huddle. She came down and chatted to the cameras. She was flanked by 3 government ministers, serving government ministers. Yes, they served under her, but they're now serving under Humza Yousaf. And it did feel like yesterday it was the big moment. It felt like it took a lot of the oxygen of publicity. It felt like she had the star power of the day. And I suppose what's interesting to me is, for a while, it's felt a bit like Hamza Yousaf's trying to emerge from the shadow of Nicola Sturgeon. He's trying to cement this as his party, with slightly different policies, with his own priorities. And I'm not sure yesterday would have helped with that all that much. He said he was very relaxed about her being there, chatting to some of his team there, like, well, look, she backed all the policies, she backed the independence plan, so we're pretty happy as well. But it does feel like she started to overshadow him a bit yesterday, and his challenge now is to prove that he's got the same kind of star attraction that his predecessor had. Well,
do you think, David Linden, it helps Hamza Yousaf's leadership to have her there?
I'd be willing to bet you a fiver that you'll mention her in his speech and pay tribute.
Only a fiver?
Well, given the cost of living crisis, Joe, I'm not going to put too much on it. But look, listen, Nicola Sturgeon has been a towering figure in the SNP
that I don't deny. But what I'm
movement.
saying is it helpful. I mean, Nick Eardley just said he was surprised that she came for the very reason that you've got headlines like that he's being overshadowed at his first conference. That's the accusation.
His speeches today, you're about to hear from the First Minister a speech that will be policy-rich, that outlines our case for tackling the cost of living crisis. crisis. The fact that Nicola Sturgeon, an SNP MSP, attends SNP conference might be front page for the Scottish Daily Mail, but I think for most people in Scotland it won't seem that surprising that somebody who's been committed to independence their entire adult life attended an SNP conference.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that she's presided over arguably one of the most successful chapters of recent SNP history, and yet you still haven't achieved your core mission? Do you think that that has been squandered? It's gone now, that hope of actually achieving it. It's a party in decline.
No, it's a party, and that's the crucial issue here. Independence is not about one individual. And when I look at opinion polling across every single age cohort, bar one, independence is in the majority. I am more confident than ever, Joe, that independence, Scottish independence, is a case of when, not if, any longer. Now, some of that is helped by the fact that we have a chaotic Westminster government that is mirrored by Sir Keir Starmer and his pro-Brexit Labour Party that are offering no solutions to the cost of living crisis. I am absolutely certain that Scotland will become an independent country. It won't be down to just one person. It will be down to the success of Scotland as a nation, and that is so much bigger than one individual.
I mean, it's interesting, Nick, while we wait for Humza Yousaf to get to his feet, I think we're expecting in the next few minutes, we're actually seeing Humza Yousaf's wife there waiting for him to take to the conference floor. The talk about Labour, I mean, obviously, because they had that stunning victory in Rutherglen and Hamilton, but also that there could be independence voters moving in large number to support Labour if they think they're going to win the next general election rather than the Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And for a while, there's been a question over where the anti-Conservative vote, particularly in the central belt of Scotland, particularly in David City, Glasgow, where that would go. And, you know, SNP strategists are worried that the message that Labour is the only party that can replace the Conservatives in government in London, that message is permeating and is doing quite well with the electorate. So I do think you're going to see a fair chunk of this speech actually from Humza Yousaf talking about Labour policies, probably having a go at Keir Starmer, because frankly the SNP is a bit worried that Labour is going to take a bunch of its seats at the next election.
Right, let's pause there and go into the hall, and Humza Yousaf, First Minister, leader of the SNP party, looks as if he's strolling onto stage to make his speech to conference. Hamza Yousaf enjoying the moment there.
Thank you. Thank you. She almost made me greet when we started. Delegates, this is a party that I consider my home, full of people I see as my extended family. And I have never felt the love, kindness, and solidarity of the SNP family as much as I have over the last 10 days. So on my behalf, on behalf of Nadia, on behalf of my girls, perhaps most importantly, on behalf of our family that is in Gaza, from the bottom of our hearts, we say thank you to each and every single one of you. What we are witnessing in the Middle East is truly heartbreaking. Imagine waking up on a Saturday morning during one of your holy festivals, as families right across Israel did last week, to find that your loved ones had been murdered or kidnapped by Hamas terrorists. It is beyond words, and to, of course, be condemned in the strongest possible manner. Or imagine living in the Gaza Strip under constant bombardment right now. No food, no water,
no power. Friends, tragically, we don't have to imagine. This is the reality for Israeli and Palestinian families alike. Too many innocent men, women, and children are suffering. The hostages must be released, and a humanitarian corridor must be open. Vital supplies let in, and Gazans who want to leave must be allowed to leave. The blockade of Gaza must end. Conference, we are absolutely clear. The life of a Palestinian is equal to the life of an Israeli. It is right for the world to condemn the actions of Hamas unequivocally. But any form of collective punishment, as we're seeing in Gaza, can never be justified. 2.2 million innocent people cannot pay the price for the actions of Hamas. And here at home, to Scotland's Jewish, Muslim, and Palestinian communities, you are communities that I love. And I want you to know, as First Minister, as a fellow human being, I share the pain and I share the sorrow that you're feeling. I've attended your synagogues, your churches, your mosques, your communities I've grown up with, I've danced with, I've laughed with, and in this last week, that I have shed many a tear with. Each and every person in Scotland, from all of the vibrant communities of our nation, must feel safe here. And as long as I'm First Minister, let me be abundantly clear. There is no room for anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or hatred of any kind here in Scotland. What did I say about making me Greek? Conference, the great American writer, Toni Morrison, said this: "No more apologies for a bleeding heart when the opposite is no heart at all. Danger of losing our humanity must be met with more humanity." In the past, people in Scotland and across the UK have opened our hearts and our homes. We've welcomed those from Syria, from Ukraine, and many other countries. Conference, we must do so again. There are currently 1 million people displaced within Gaza. So therefore, I'm calling today on the international community to commit to a worldwide refugee program for the people of Gaza. I'm calling on the UK government to take two urgent steps. Firstly, they should immediately begin work on the creation of a refugee resettlement scheme for those in Gaza who want to and, of course, are able to leave. And when they do so, Scotland is willing to be the first country in the UK to offer safety and sanctuary to those who are caught up in these terrible attacks. Conference, my brother-in-law is a doctor in Gaza. When we can get through to him on the phone, he tells us of scenes of absolute carnage. Hospitals running out of medical supplies, doctors, nurses, having to make the most difficult decision of all: who to treat and who to let die. That can't be allowed. Not in this day and age. So I therefore urge the UK government to support the medical evacuation of injured civilians in Gaza. And let me be clear. Scotland is ready to play her part, and our hospitals will treat the injured men, women and children of Gaza where we can. Delegates, I joined the SNP almost 20 years ago because I could see that it was an outward-looking, an internationalist party, resolute in its support for human rights right around the world. Today, those values have never been more important, so that we can make our contribution abroad and build the fairer society we know is possible right here at home. This is meant to be a rich country, yet it feels like too many are struggling, no matter how hard they work. It can seem like society is becoming even more polarized, when frankly, there is a lot more common ground than we realize. People see all this, and they want to know who has a plan to make their lives better, to make Scotland a fairer, a more prosperous country. Delegates, if we, the SNP, want to continue to be trusted by the people of Scotland, and if we want to take them on our journey to independence, then we need to show them that we have the answers to these questions. A couple of weeks ago, we had a tough night in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. Now, we can either spend time feeling sorry for ourselves, or we can take another course of action. Let me tell you what that is. We roll up our sleeves, we work harder than ever before for the people of Scotland, and this is how I'm going to lead this party forward. It starts by standing by our values, sticking up for what we believe in, and always, every day, standing up for the people of Scotland. Friends, we have used our time in government to cement our social contract with the people. A contract that says, yes, those who earn the most should pay the most. But a social contract in which everyone benefits, regardless of wealth. I'm proud this SNP-led government, Scottish Government, has brought our rail back into public ownership. A rail service that is run for people, not run for profit, and a rail service under this SNP government that has scrapped peak time fares. We've abolished prescription charges. We've made sure our NHS staff are the best paid in the UK, and now our brilliant social care workers will be paid at least £12 an hour. We've invested in our schools, more teachers and higher spending per pupil than anywhere in the UK. We've seen the biggest ever reduction in the attainment gap on literacy and numeracy in primary schools in a single year. We're helping families with the cost of living at times when they need it the most. Childcare provision, a rent freeze, free bus travel for young people, and conference. Here is another choice the SNP have made. If you're a parent struggling on a low income, you're now entitled to £25 a week thanks to the Scottish Child Payment. When budgets are tight, that's a huge investment for any government to make. But it's the right choice. Do you know what it means? It means an estimated 90,000 fewer children in Scotland are living in poverty this year because of the actions of the SNP government. That's our government that's delivered and delivering for the people of Scotland. And friends, that delivery is, of course, in no small part down to my predecessor. Conference Nicola Sturgeon transformed Scotland. She reformed Scotland's public services. She improved the life chances of thousands of Scotland's young people. And we will never forget, in the toughest of times our country faced, Nicola was the calmest of voices and the coolest of heads. So for all of this and more, we say thank you, Nicola. Delegates, people are rightly interested in what we have done for them. But if we're going to earn and re-earn their trust, what we're going to do for them in the future is more important. So let me tell you what we're going to do. I'll start with that most pressing of issues, helping people through these difficult times. Nobody in Scotland caused this Westminster cost of living crisis, but almost everybody in Scotland is suffering because of it. And I never thought that in 2023, people on above average salaries would be coming to my constituency surgeries asking for financial help. Nurses, teachers, police officers, these workers, they're the very backbone of Scotland's public services. People like them are being hit by this crisis too. We know that people are filled with dread when bills are going up and up. Now, we can't stop all bills from rising, but where we can act, we absolutely should. I've considered carefully what steps we can take to help. Council tax bills in Scotland are already hundreds of pounds a year lower than they are in England. We're committed to fundamentally reforming local taxation. We'll re-energise our work to do just that. We have consulted on what level the council tax should be next year. At conference, we have listened and we have reached our decision. I can announce to the people of Scotland that next year, your council tax will be frozen. And that's the SNP delivering for people when they need it the most. Conference, as well as supporting people during these tough times, we need to do everything we can to support our public services. And there is no more cherished an institution than our National Health Service. The SNP are already providing record funding to our health service. We have the best performing A&E units in the UK. But increased waiting lists are the inevitable consequence of the necessary decisions we had to make during the pandemic. We're working hard to reduce these. We've seen significant reductions in the longest waits since targets were announced last July. We've opened 2 national treatment centres this year in Fife and Highland, dedicated centres for elective procedures. And by the end of this year, we'll expand that capacity with a new centre in Forth Valley and the second phase of NHS Golden Jubilee in Glasgow. But conference, too many people are still waiting too long for treatment. And that's why I'm announcing today that in each of the next 3 years, we will provide an extra £100 million to cut waiting lists in our NHS. This additional £300 million of investment will allow us to maximise capacity, build greater resilience into the system, and deliver year-on-year reductions in the number of patients who have waited far too long. This will reduce waiting lists by an estimated 100,000 patients by 2026. When our NHS needs us, this party steps up, delivering for patients, delivering for our NHS, and crucially, delivering for Scotland. Conference, we are of course here meeting in Aberdeen, Europe's energy capital. A city that successive Westminster governments, be they Labour or Tory, have used as a cash cow, squandered billions that flowed to the Treasury and barely invested a fraction back. And instead of having a fund that can invest in all of our futures, the people of this city, the people of Aberdeen, are having to fundraise to rejuvenate the very heart of their city. Union Street is the silver mile of Scotland's energy capital. And therefore, I can announce today that the Scottish Government will provide £400,000 to the campaign to rejuvenate Union Street. You see, delegates, this is just the latest in the transformation of Scotland's cities, whether it's here in Aberdeen and with Union Street, St James's Quarter in Edinburgh, the ambitious Clyde mission in the city of Glasgow. New life is being breathed into our urban centres. And in Dundee, a city very close to my heart, the SNP will support the superb regeneration of the disused gas works into a new Eden project, a beacon for regeneration and a beacon for green tourism. Conference, the oil and gas industry, and most crucially, our workers here in the northeast, are absolutely vital to Scotland's economy, and they will be for many years to come. But we also need to look to the future. So a just transition isn't just important for tackling the climate emergency. For that, it absolutely is. It's also a huge economic opportunity. Successful bidders for the ScotWind offshore licensing round have indicated that there's the potential for £25 billion to be invested in the Scottish supply chain over the lifetime of Scotland. But we can't just sit back and expect that opportunity to just fall into our laps. We've got to work with industry. And when we work with industry, we are absolutely determined to create it. So I can therefore announce today that over the next 5 years, the Scottish Government will invest up to £500 million to anchor a new offshore wind supply chain right here in Scotland. A catalyst for additional private investment in our ports and our harbours, supporting inward investment, encouraging domestic companies to seek new opportunities. That's cutting emissions, that's creating sustainable jobs and sending a clear message to global investors that Scotland means business. Delegates, all of us, each and every single one of us in this hall cares deeply about equality. And to the fellow men in the room, we all have a duty, me of course included, to stand up and be counted, and call out abuse and violence women suffer far too often in our society. You know, I was proud to be the Justice Secretary when the Domestic Abuse Act came into force. But conference, there's so much more to do. It takes incredible courage for a survivor of domestic abuse to come forward to ask for help. But often, women feel they can't leave their abusive partner because they don't know how they'll feed themselves or their children. They don't know how they'll be able to put a roof over their heads. I can only imagine how agonizing that must be. That's why today I can announce that we will pilot a new £500,000 fund to support women in this, the most distressing of circumstances. It's called the Fund to Leave. It will be delivered by women's aid groups in the 5 council areas with the highest number of women presenting as homeless due to domestic abuse. Women will receive up to £1,000 to help them pay for the essentials that they and their children need. Because conference, let us in this hall today say to any woman or survivor of domestic abuse that we stand with you. Conference, our nation, it's rich in culture and the arts. Culture is a reflection of who we are. It's also a reflection of who we hope to be as people. We don't just value culture and the arts for the economic impact they bring. We value them for their own sake, for the joy that they bring the world. And delegates, you heard exactly what a joy culture brings to young people earlier this afternoon when you were treated to a brilliant performance by Sistema's Big Noise Govan Hill. And I can tell you, conference, they have more musical ability in their left pinkies than I do in my whole body. But nonetheless, I do want to send a clear signal today about my ambition for culture in Scotland. We're not just going to protect our arts funding. We're not just going to increase it in line with inflation. No, delegates, we're going to go further than that. I can announce today that over the next 5 years, we will invest, and we will more than double our investment in Scotland's arts and culture. This means that by the end of the 5 years, our investment will be £100 million higher than it is today. This is a huge vote of confidence in the future of our culture sector and in the vital work of bodies like Screen Scotland, Creative Scotland, and our festivals. And delegates, politics is about choices. I choose to ensure that Scotland's arts and culture are supported to grow at home and to be seen right across the world. Conference, the choices we make, they're driven by our principles, our convictions, our values. Values, they're not abstract. They determine the practical policies that governments pursue. And those policies can have a profound impact on all of our lives. So let me give you one example of a very different set of values to those that are held by the SNP. At the Tory party conference, the UK Home Secretary warned about what she described as a hurricane of migrants coming to the UK and other Western countries. When I hear that dog whistle language, it makes me shudder. But you know what else it does? It makes me resolve to work even harder for independence, so that Scotland's policies are decided here in Scotland, and our immigration policies can never, ever be decided by extremist Westminster politicians. You see, not only is the anti-migrant rhetoric morally wrong, of that is, it's also bad for our economy. Our migration economy, our migration policy, it'll be based and founded on core principles. It'll be welcoming, it'll be internationalist, it will be compassionate. So let me be clear. We will always speak out against the voices of extremism, against those who want to fuel a culture war. And when we secure independence, the hostile environment will be gone, and it will be gone for good. Friends, it says something, doesn't it, about the modern-day Tory party, that such rhetoric from the Home Secretary is seen as a pitch for the leadership. Suella Braverman's most compassionate moment came when she stood in the tail of a guide dog conference. But to be serious, the Tories making the culture wars their election strategy. Do you know what it says? It says the Tories know they're defeated. They're done. They're finished. Conference, good riddance to them. Now, that leaves Labour. And when it comes to values, I've got absolutely no idea what Keir Starmer stands for. When it comes to Keir Starmer, the closer he gets to Downing Street, the further he retreats from his principles. Let me give you an example. Once upon a time, Keir Starmer agreed with the SNP that it was abhorrent to force women who've been raped to provide proof before they could access child benefits. But now, Labour and Sir Keir Starmer say they plan to apply Tory policies, like the rape clause, in their words, more fairly. Delegates, the so-called rape clause is one of the cruelest policies devised by this inhumane Tory government. The only fair thing to do with the rape clause is to abolish it. The rape clause will certainly have no place in an independent Scotland, and frankly, it should have no place in any modern civilised society. Conference, the Tories are finished. Labour has abandoned its principles, but the SNP will always stand by ours. And at our conference on Sunday, we decided together on the process for winning our country's independence. This was a very important debate, but if I can be so bold in a room that is full of committed independent supporters, it's not process arguments that will achieve our goal. Around half of our fellow Scots already support independence. And I have no doubt that we can turn that half into a sustained majority. And we will do so when we concentrate not on the how, but on the why. And we came together on Sunday and we agreed. At the next election, page 1, line 1 of our manifesto will say, vote SNP for Scotland to become an independent country. And the reason that will be page 1, line 1 of our next manifesto is because independence is about building a better Scotland. Independence is not simply an end in itself. It's inextricably linked to the cost of living crisis. It's about raising living standards. It's about protecting our NHS. Above all, it's about a new well-being economy, an economy that works for the people, not the other way round. And on the economy, Keir Starmer says he wants growth, growth, growth. Well, there's a huge problem with that, because he also supports Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. Brexit can't be made to work for Scotland. It has been an unmitigated disaster. And with independence, we can escape the failed UK Brexit-based economy and take our place for the very first time as a member state in our own right of the European Union. Conference, we know that people have suffered because of Westminster crashing the economy. We know the challenges that people are facing every day. But delegates, we do not seek independence for Scotland despite these challenges. We seek independence for Scotland because of them. European countries that are like Scotland are fairer and wealthier than the UK. Ireland, Norway, Denmark, Austria, Finland, and other comparable nations have higher national income per head than the UK. They have higher productivity, lower inequality, lower poverty. So with all of our talent, with our world-class food and drink, world-class universities, world-class sectors like life sciences, video games, financial services, with an abundance of renewable energy, and confidence, most importantly, with our hard-working, gallus, talented people as our greatest asset, I ask the question, why not Scotland? But we are doing more than campaigning to win our independence. We are preparing for independence because we're building the institutions for delivery. Since 2014 in government, we've set up a new social security system, a tax agency, a national investment bank. We've expanded our overseas network with new offices in Berlin and Copenhagen. With Brexit, Westminster is isolating itself from the world. With the SNP, to paraphrase Winnie Ewing, Madame Écosse, Scotland is joining the world. Friends, we're going to take further steps that will both provide direct benefits under devolution and will also prepare us for independence. The UK has a shocking record on capital investment. As First Minister, I'm co-chair of the Scottish Government's investor panel, made up of a group of distinguished experts. They're challenging the Scottish Government to be bold. And that's why I'm announcing our most ambitious proposal yet. I can confirm. I will go again. I can confirm. That's how ambitious it is. It has left me speechless. I am delighted to announce our most ambitious proposal yet. I can confirm that by the end of this Parliament, the SNP government will, subject of course to due diligence and appropriate market testing, we will go directly to the international bond market for the first time in our own right. To fund vital infrastructure, projects like affordable housing, we will issue Scotland's first ever bond. This will bring Scotland to the attention of investors right across the world. It will raise our profile as a place where investment returns can be made. And in doing so, we will show the world not only that we're a country to invest in today, will also demonstrate the credibility to international markets that we will need when we're going to become an independent country. Delegates, The SNP is delivering for the people of Scotland, and brick by brick, institution by institution, we are laying the foundations for what will be our newly independent state. We are truly living in the early days of a better nation. Conference, when it comes to setting out our perspectives for a better Scotland, we'll be stepping up the pace. We've set out our macroeconomic framework, detailing currency policy. We published plans for a written constitution, a constitution, of course, that would provide recognition, protection for the NHS in Scotland, giving the right to access a system of healthcare available free at the point of need. A constitution that recognises and protects employment rights, including, of course, the right to strike. And conference, a constitution that, most importantly, would recognise that sovereignty will always sit with the people who live here, not with the House of Commons, and certainly not with the House of Lords. And precisely because our plan for a new economy will be at the heart of our new independence prospectus, we'll shortly bring forward our plans for migration. We'll set out our plans for industrial policy. We'll show how we can improve conditions for businesses and, crucially, for workers too. We'll show how we can encourage greater private sector investment in Scotland. Success for Scotland, it will not come automatically. We all know that. Our success will be determined by all of us as a country and by the decisions that we take. Do you know, Scotland's at its best when we are at our most confident. Just look at Steve Clarke's men, the magnificent Scotland men's team. In fact, conference, given our men's team's scintillating run of form, can I say that by the time Scotland co-hosts Euro 2028, I look forward to defending Scotland's title as European champions. Conference, there's nothing wrong with being an optimist. Delegates, all too often, some people talk about Scotland's immense contribution to the world as if it's something that's over. But for me, Scotland has a lot more to offer tomorrow than we did yesterday. If we are willing to go on this journey together, then we can make sure that this is the case. Every single person living here can play their part in building a new Scotland. All of us will have a stake in our new country, and we all deserve to enjoy the fruits of that success. Let's remember that we in this party are the custodians of a cause that's far greater than all of us. In a world where it can be easy to feel powerless, there's no greater act of empowerment than to take our destiny into our own hands. And there is no greater gift that we can leave our children than a country which is theirs to create in their own image. Conference, that which we seek for our nation is neither unwise nor untested. It is neither unreasonable nor unobtainable. Rather, it has been the stated ambition of nations the world over for the simple reason that independence works. Nations today, which relative to Scotland's great age, are in many cases mere youngsters. And that, my friends, is the great irony about Scotland's journey towards independence. One of the world's oldest nations will become its youngest independent state. And with the vitality of youth, we can step out into that world anew, into the bright light of a new dawn, with our eyes wide open to a whole new world of possibility. Together, united, let's get out there and make it happen. Thank you, conference.
Well, they're all on their feet, as you would expect, as Humza Yousaf ends his conference speech there in Aberdeen, his first as party leader of the SNP. I'm sure there will now be a fairly lengthy standing ovation for him to enjoy and embrace. It was emotional at the beginning. He was clearly moved as he talked about the crisis in Israel, particularly because his wife's family, his wife's parents, are trapped in Gaza. He condemned unequivocally the massacre in Israel by Hamas terrorists and called for hostages to be released. But he said there had to be a humanitarian corridor out of Gaza, and the blockade by the Israelis on Gaza must come to an end. He then called on the international community to commit to a worldwide refugee programme for the people of Gaza, at which Scotland would play a key role. And we can talk about that in a few minutes' time with my guest here in the studio, David Linden, SNP MP. There were a lot of announcements, a lot of spending commitments and spending more in various areas in Scottish society. And the question there, I suppose, is where the money will be found. There was, of course, talk of independence, but it didn't dominate in quite the way it has in previous speeches. He's being embraced there by his father, there on the front row, and his mum, and no doubt by his wife, Nadia El Nakla. As I say, emotional time for them at the moment. Let's bring in David Linden and talk a little bit. First of all, your reaction to the speech. It was about 45 minutes long. It was wide-ranging. What did you think?
I think it outlined who Humza is as a person. I think it also outlined his vision. And most importantly, with the powers that he has as First Minister, what we're trying to do to help people with the biggest issue right now, the cost of living crisis. That freeze, that commitment to a freeze on council tax will be warmly welcomed in communities right across Scotland, because one of the things that I've seen when I've been on the doorsteps, and I've been on the doorsteps an awful lot recently, is people in all income brackets saying, I'm struggling right now, I need help. And I think what you've seen from Humza Yousaf there is a commitment to do what the Scottish Government can, but also outlining that vision of how Scotland could be a fairer, wealthier, independent nation. I think it was packed with lots of policies on it, I'm sure many of which you're going to ask me about, but I think it was just a really good speech that outlines his vision for the country. Right,
I mean, that freezing of council tax was certainly the most eye-catching. It got a massive cheer in the audience, as you would expect. What about local authorities? That's pretty tough for them, providing vital services, and you are imposing on them a freeze to part of their revenue to deliver those services.
Well, we don't impose anything on local authorities. There's always a relationship with local government. That's why there was the Verity House agreement just recently, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, resetting that relationship with Scottish local government. This is in strong recognition of the fact that in communities in my constituency and right across Scotland, people are really struggling, and every single time a bill lands on their doorstep, it is going up. And for the things that we can control, working with our colleagues in local government, we're going to freeze.
Well, and people will welcome that. Are you going to make up the shortfall then to councils?
Well, we work with the budgets that we've got at the moment. Of course, one of the natures of devolution is that we've got to largely work with fixed budgets. That's something that we've done, unlike the Westminster government, who crashed the economy last year, for which we're all paying a massive price.
Well, as you say, you do have levers. I mean, there were a lot of commitments from Hamza Yousaf. He said that the Scottish Government will invest up to £500 million to anchor a new offshore wind supply chain right here in Scotland. There would be a £500,000 pilot fund to support women in the most distressing of circumstances. There was money for rejuvenating city centres and high streets and Aberdeen. And also, over the next 5 years, we will more than double our investment in Scotland's arts and culture. Where are you finding all this money?
Well, I'll take, for example, just one of the policies in there, that £500,000 that is going towards women who have been subject to domestic abuse. What a contrast, Joe. We've got a Scottish Government that recognises women who have been through the most unimaginable torment possible. Contrast that to Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, who want to make women prove that they have been raped simply in order to receive child benefit.
I don't deny that committing that amount of money for a cause like that is hugely worthwhile. But taking it in the round, I haven't been able to add up every single commitment. Where will you find the money?
Well, we have to work within the fixed budgets that we've got at the moment. Right. But this speech from Humza, I think, was a real real opportunity to outline what his ambition is, what his vision is, and I think he has set that out today. And I think one of the interesting things will be people are looking at that speech and seeing that it was policy heavy, and that responds to the biggest issue that people face right now, and it's that cost of living crisis. The other thing that we haven't touched on, of course, is the £100 million over the next 3 years to reduce NHS waiting lists. One of the big issues that people
that has been a failure on his watch, of course, hasn't it?
No, I mean, so for example, in Scotland, we've already got the lowest accident emergency wait times compared to the rest of the UK.
Well, maybe, but what about your own figures that you put out? I mean, Humza Yousaf said in his speech Scotland has the best performing A&E units in the UK, but Public Health Scotland data from August this year showed only 71.3% of A&E attendances were seen and triggered within 4 hours, or triaged, I should say. So not comparing to other parts of the UK, but by your own metrics.
Well, that's the very point, is that we don't just want to compare ourselves to other parts of the UK. We want Scotland to have the best NHS, and that is why the First Minister has invested that £100 million more over the next 3 years to reduce those waiting lists.
Right, well, Hamza Yousaf seems to be back. Oh, he's just finished.
Oh, he's just telling everybody to go on with it now.
Absolutely, there for the cameras. Let's catch up with Nick Eardley, who was inside the hall for the speech, is now outside, particularly on that policy of freezing council tax. David Linden said they're working with local councils, so I presume they're all warmly welcome this freeze.
I doubt it, is the honest answer, Joe. There was a council tax freeze in Scotland for the best part of a decade. It was controversial. There was then a limit on how much councils could increase council tax by. That was only lifted a couple of years ago for the 22-23 year, and it's back. So it'll be interesting to see the reaction to that. I think there will be some concerns raised, some concerns already raised by the Greens, the Scottish Greens, who are in government with the SNP Holyrood. I just want to read you one line of what they said. They said, "We are concerned about the effect this freeze could have on already strained frontline public services if it's not properly funded." So we'll be trying to find out a bit more about how it's going to be funded. It is a big pledge, and it's designed to be, as David was pitching it there, to help with the cost of living. But it will raise a big question about already strained local authorities in Scotland, where the cash is going to come from, how much extra they'll get from the Scottish Government, because the expectation had been that council tax bills in Scotland, like they are in a lot of England, would go up quite considerably because of those challenges that councils are facing. So I think that's one of the immediate questions that Humza Yousaf will face. Where's the cash coming from? Are you going to make sure that councils have enough?
Nick Eardley there in Aberdeen, thank you very much. Let's just spend the last few minutes before the programme ends with David Linden and talk more broadly about Humza Yousaf's pitch to Scotland, which is that independence will make you better off broadly, that if you have all the levers of independence, but the figures don't point in that direction, do they, David? Because Scotland's deficit running at 9% of the economy, comparing to 5.2% deficit for the UK. I mean, if you just take those two figures, you're better off in the UK.
No, we're not. And the fact is that the figures that you're quoting from are, of course, based on Scotland as being within the United Kingdom at the moment. Part of the problem that we've got, Joe, with our economy is the fact that we have a Westminster government that we did not vote for. Indeed, we've not voted. Majority for the Conservatives since 1955.
The premise of all questions that are put to you is frustrating for the audience. If you just take those figures, what people want to know is how will you make up that shortfall? Without North Sea oil revenues, that deficit jumps to 15% as a share of Scotland's GDP, and you're wanting to wind down those revenues to reach net zero by 2045. Where will you find those billions of pounds of revenue to make people better off under independence?
Well, with the full powers of independence, we can grow our economy.
Well,
the reality is, take, for example, just migration, right? So we have an immigration system that's controlled by the United Kingdom government here in London.
So high levels of...
Without net inward migration, Scotland has a falling population. With independence, we have control over migration, control over our economy, and the ability to deliver a fairer, wealthier nation.
David Linden, thank you for keeping me company. That was Humza Yousaf's speech to conference. It's all we have time for today, but I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live and Prime Minister's Questions at 11:15. From all of us here, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.